want to talk to you now about valuing the environment. Now, this is a great challenge, and so I'm going to introduce to you two different approaches that you can use. The first approach you might think of as surveys. We call this contingent ranking or surveys. Um, we also refer to it as stated preferences. In other words, we're asking people to tell us, to state what their preferences are as a method of trying to come up with a value for things. The second method is what we call revealed preferences. Here, we're looking at individual behavior, and based on that behavior, determining a value. And there are two basic methods there. One is what we call travel costs, and the other is hedonic pricing. Contingent valuation, or stated preferences, is the use of surveys to find out people's preferences. Now, the challenge with surveys is, of course, there are many biases involved, both from the person conducting the survey and the person who's participating in the survey. We have two different kinds of surveys, willingness to pay and willingness to accept. So think of it this way. In the movie Up, there was a firm that was trying to buy the old man's house, and they were making him offers. He continued to refuse. This was willingness to accept. So they were trying to figure out what is he willing to accept. On the other hand, sometimes we need to know what people are willing to pay. So willingness to pay, willingness to accept. Let's talk about techniques. There are a number of techniques in conducting surveys. One of these is known as the payment card method. You can think of this as having a card with a list of options, and then the person chooses which one is appropriate. Another technique is what we call open-ended. Here, you don't present them with anything. You just ask them, how much would you be willing to pay, or how much would you be willing to accept? And they give you a number. Another method, of course, is the single payment. Would you be willing to pay this amount? Yes or no? Would you be willing to accept this amount? Yes or no? And then you can have a case of single bounded or double bounded. So with single bounded, you have a starting point. You might say, would you be willing to pay $10, $20, $30, $40 more? So $10 would be the bound on the bottom. You could also have a bound at the top. Double bounded, of course, would put a bottom and a top, and they would have to pick something in between. Finally, there's another method, which we call the choice method. Here, what we're doing is we have too many options for people to choose from because there are so many different combinations of things. And so what we do is we package those up into 3 or 4 packages, and then they choose from those. So for example, if we were looking at a park and we were looking at what features should we spend money on for this park, we might consider there could be trails, there could be camping, there could be guides, there could be a number of different packages that could be involved. And so you might put together 3 different packages that would incorporate some of those. You could also use a contingent ranking method. Here you give them a number of options and they rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Now let's talk about problems. The first problem is that all surveys are hypothetical. So we're asking you, how much would you be willing to pay to have a park in your neighborhood? And let's suppose you say $1,000. And then we say, okay, we'll send you a bill. Well, wait. No, I don't want to pay $1,000. Well, you said $1,000. Well, it was hypothetical, right? So hypothetical questions get hypothetical answers. And that makes it very difficult to know if what we're putting together is correct. In the case of willingness to accept, we run into what's called the endowment effect. Now, that's something that we saw, again, in the movie Up, where the old man had ownership of that little house, and it was full of memories for him. And those memories were priceless. And so the endowment effect had set in, and you basically were not going to be able to buy that house for any price. But the endowment effect can be very simple. It doesn't have to be that extreme. And what Kahneman discovered in his research on human biases is that when we take ownership of something and take it into our possession, we immediately give it a higher value. This is why people buy stocks and then they don't want to sell them. Even though they should sell them, they just hang on to them. I've found that I have to use an exercise for myself where I say, if I had the money that's in this stock in my bank account, would I buy that stock with it? And if I say to myself, well, no, then I sell it. And if I say yes, then I keep it. Otherwise, it's really hard to overcome the endowment effect. Now, the other biases are all related to the people conducting the survey. And the first of these is the strategic bias. Strategic bias is reflected in the questions. The way the questions are worded sends a signal to the person who's taking the survey and results in a different or biased or skewed result. It could also be who you ask to participate. So, for example, if I'm trying to determine the value of a stream that's running through the town and maintaining it stocked with fish, it would be inappropriate for me to go stand outside the tackle shop and ask questions there about how much value people put on fishing. That would be the worst place I could go because it would be strategically inappropriate. Another bias is information bias. Here, you're asking people to make a decision, but you're not giving them all the information or you're skewing the information. So, for example, let's suppose we have a piece of land in the downtown and we have two options. So we present to people that you can build apartment building on it or you can turn it into a park. Now, if I have two examples of what those might look like, and I have a black and white, rundown looking apartment building with people who are unhappy standing around it, and then I have a color illustration of a beautiful park and families enjoying themselves, that would be information bias. A third bias is starting point bias. Now, starting point bias is where I put a value as the initial value that's actually higher than what people would be willing to pay. So if I say, would you be willing to pay $100 or $200? Well, then that person feels like they have to answer either 100 or 200. When in reality, they might say, I'm only really willing to pay $10. So as we're putting together these surveys, it's very important that we try to overcome and eliminate these kinds of biases in our presentation, in our questions, and in how we gather the information. Otherwise, our results are going to be highly skewed.